Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. Today we're taking a look at some meta developments, particularly a couple of cards that are trending because of the Fire King structure deck, which should be coming out next week. That deck looks really meta defining, and so we see some cards trending because they are being used either by or against the strategy. Of course, the deck won't be full power in December. It gets additional boosts from Phantom Nightmare, which will make it really scary, but nevertheless, we should still be aware of what the deck is and how it works for the next couple of months, and therefore how it will impact the market. Let's get started. So to kick things off, we're taking a look at Fire Formation Tanky. So this is a card that has seen a ton of play ever since its release, being a key card that enables decks like Fire Fist, Tri-Brigade, and Zodiac. As a result, we've seen Tanky receive a lot of different printings, while also moving on and off the ban list a lot as well. Right now this card is at 3, so you can max out on this card if you so choose, and that seems to be how Fire King players are leaning. Fire Kings do play a couple of different level 4 Beast Warrior monsters, and I believe they're actually quite important because they're the negates that you can just normal summon for free. And also, since this is a continuous spell, you can send this to the graveyard in order to summon out your copy of Diabellstar, since a lot of Fire King decks do choose to run the Diabellstar engine as well. So the various printings of Tanky are actually kind of weird. There are a ton of different lower rarity options. I don't want to talk too much about those. With the ultimate rares, which are in my opinion some of the nicest ultimate rares that have ever been printed, they're around $85 to $90, which is actually like relatively low for that printing. They've been trending downwards over the last year or so, which is something we've seen with a lot of different high-end cards getting additional rarity bumps in sets like Rarity Collection. And then with the collector's rares, those are the ones going the opposite way. The cheapest ones that you can buy right now on TCG Player are around $50, but the highest that they've sold for is within that $30 to $35 range. This is a card that's so difficult to guess on because it always feels like it's just such an easy card for Konami to hit as a scapegoat, as a way to curb the power of whatever Beast Warrior based strategy is in the game at the moment. Personally, I think there's a great budget alternative in these secret rares, either from Fist of the Gadgets or the Speed Duel box, as I think those look really clean, but they're still quite affordable at only a couple of dollars per copy. Up next, let's talk about Crossout Designator. So I think we've actually talked about this card quite a few times over the past couple of years, and by now we all know that this card was really hyped and successful over in the OCG to the point where it's now limited, but it never really saw that success translate over here in the TCG. For some reason, Tom always opens with this card against me when he's playing Branded Chimera. I'll have the Ash Blossom, but he'll just have the Crossout Designator all the time. Generally, we don't see too many people topping with this card in the main or side deck right now, despite it being one of the few cards that you can add to your deck to play through cards like Nibiru or Infinite Impermanence. Moving into next format, I think that Crossout Designator could potentially see more play. I think that especially before the rest of the Snake Eye stuff comes out, or maybe if you're just planning on not running the Diabellstar engine at all, Fire Kings could really benefit from running Crossout to play through cards like Ash or Nibiru. The other thing to keep in mind is that most of the other staples in the game were actually reprinted in Rarity Collection. Not all of them, but a lot of things like Talents, Imperm, Droplet, Lightning Storm, Evenly, Ash, they're all reprinted, so meta staples in general are actually fairly cheap right now, but this means that we should expect to see the other staples that weren't reprinted start to go up. Think of it kind of like how if one card from a meta deck gets reprinted and makes the entire deck more accessible, we expect to see some of the other pieces go up in price. Right now, Crossout still has just 2 printings, with the Ultra and Secret Rares, each of them from the tins, and each of those is right around the $10 to $11 mark. This still feels relatively low since the price hasn't really changed much over the last while. I think that this is a card you should consider picking up if you don't already have it. Hopefully you can grab a set for around $20 to $25, as barring this card getting some random reprint, I definitely see the card going up over the next couple of months. Moving on, this is a card I definitely didn't think I'd be talking about in 2023, almost 2024, but it's Soul Release. Now this card is actually from Metal Raiders, the second set that was ever released, and it has a really simple effect. You target up to 5 cards from either graveyard and banish them. Really simple, but this card is actually looking like a really solid side deck card going into next format. A ton of different Fire King monsters have effects that trigger in the graveyard or summon back from the graveyard, so using Soul Release at the start of your turn to just banish all of them really makes it difficult for Fire Kings to play. This card could also be pretty effective against Horus monsters. Once they're in the graveyard, if you banish them, your opponent can't just summon them back even if they have King's Sarcophagus up. Worth noting also is that Soul Release is a normal spell card, so you can search it off of Triple Tactics Thrust. Now right now, this is a pretty popular side deck card over in the OCG, and I definitely think it's valid enough to see play here eventually in the TCG as well. Strangely enough, despite how old the card is, it only has one holo printing from back in the Secret Forces, the same set where Necros came out back in 2015. I remember pulling this card and just throwing it into my holo bulk, but actually this card is a really solid $4 to $5 per copy on TCG Player right now. Definitely a cool card that's worth digging up out of your holo bulk if you can, though of course if you don't want to drop money for a holo printing, there's a ton of different common printings for this card that you should be able to grab still for under $1. Up next we have Clara and Rushka, the Ventrilla duo. This is a Link 1 monster that's pretty easy to go into. You simply need to use one normal summoned or set monster. Now I think that in the past we have talked about this card before. It specifically saw play because it's a spellcaster, and if someone tried to lock you out of spell cards with Secret Village of the Spellcasters, this card was a really easy way to get a spellcaster onto your side of the field. Well, now this card is trending on the market again, but for a different reason. It's because this is an extra deck monster that you can basically always have access to, and it allows you to make an SP Little Knight using an extra deck monster a little bit more consistently, provided that you have the room in your extra deck. SP's Banish effect is really one of the defining aspects of the card, and we're constantly seeing more and more tech cards being used in the extra deck just to get access to that Banish between cards like Relinquished Anima, Link Karibo, and now Clara and Rushka. Oddly enough, Clara and Rushka has never gotten a reprint. It has just one ultra rare printing available from back in Extreme Force, so while the card was only $2 to $3 a couple of weeks ago, it's now up to $8 to $9 each. This is something I could definitely see getting a random common or super rare reprint in an upcoming OTS tournament pack, but aside from there, we don't really have too many big reprint sets coming up. See if you have this card lying around and keep one for yourself just in case you do need to use it, but definitely consider offloading the others while it is seeing meta play with limited availability. So this is an interesting one. It's Salamangreat Raging Phoenix. This is a big Link 4 monster that just needs 2 fire effect monsters to be used as material to summon it. So the key thing to note here is that you can make it with Prisoner Princess from Phantom Nightmare and then any other fire effect monster. So this card has a couple of effects. If it is reincarnate summoned, you can search for a Salamangreat card from your deck. Not bad, especially since Salamangrates are starting to creep back into the format over in the OCG. The other effect is that if a face-up fire monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card out, and then it gains attack points equal to the destroyed monster's attack points. So this card is potentially a really big body that can be used to push for damage in the mid-game as well. I know that right now I think players are using Amblowale as their Link 4 fire monster of choice to end boards with in decks like Rescue Ace and Fire Kings with all of the new Phantom Nightmare support over in the OCG. But it definitely seems that Raging Phoenix may be a viable alternative. This card only has one printing as an ultra rare, but it did come out in Soul Burning Volcano, which is possibly one of the most underwhelming sets ever printed. Now, all of that said, we've seen a bit of movement in Raging Phoenix's price. Due to this set not being open that much, even when it first came out, the card was only around like $7 or so. It shot up to almost $15 when people realized, hey, maybe Salamangreat isn't too bad, but it fell off pretty shortly after and has been at around $10 for the last month and a half, 2 months or so. Now we've seen it go right back up to the $15 mark. So if you're playing Salamangreat, you probably need like 2 to 3 copies of this card. If you're playing just a more generic fire deck, you probably just need to own 1 copy because it's just an option and probably not something you're going to be making every single game. Either way, this card is pretty difficult to find because no one really opened the set, so it's probably in your best interest to pick up this card sooner rather than later with all of the different fire support on the way. Okay, so this is an interesting one. It's Sleipnir the Runic main. So aside from all of the Runic cards coming in Tactical Masters, we actually had this additional fusion monster come out in Duelist Nexus. Honestly, it feels a bit out of place in the Runic deck. This thing has a quick effect during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, where you banish this card and an opponent's face-up monster until the end of the turn, and then for some reason it also has this token generating effect. This card also happens to be a level 9 monster, so very different from the other Runic fusions. Now, I do want to give a shout out here to Dan to Dare and that one Trainer 5818 for letting us know in the comments of the last Market Watch that the reason for Lopter spiking was 2 remote regional tops for Runic Generator, and presumably that's what has contributed to the upward trend of Sleipnir here as well. I did take a little bit of a look into some of what the deck can do, And it seems like an interesting rogue deck, though I don't think it's going to be like meta or top tier anytime soon. I completely forgot, but Generator's actually got a new card called Vala back in Photon Hypernova, and she's a pretty good looking combo piece that can help get multiple level 9 monsters onto the board to make rank 9 plays as well. But yeah, Sleipnir is basically a free level 9 body, so the runic cards can either be disruptions or you can use them to special summon out an extender, which is kind of cool. And of course, if you're ripping cards out of your opponent's hand with multiple copies of Enter Blathnir, that's fewer cards that they can use to fight through your runic spells, and you just naturally out advantage your opponent. Now for now, Sleipnir is a rather new card that's only a couple of sets old, and the secrets have been on an upward trend over the last little bit. I believe they were only like $3 to $5 before. They're currently sitting at just under $10 per copy. Personally, I do think that the runic engine's really splashable, and it's something that everyone should have access to, especially with how cheap all the cards were thanks to the megatins. So I have a set of Sleipnir with all the rest of my stuff. Aside from that though, if you do have extras, you might want to consider offloading some copies of Sleipnir now. There's a bit of hype for the card right now, but I don't think that it's really going to be sustainable in the long run, and I am expecting Sleipnir to cool off over the next couple of months. Alright, so there's one final card I want to talk about briefly, and it is Denko Sea. So this is one of Tombox's favorite cards, and it's a pretty devastating one to have dropped on you. Basically, as long as you don't have any set cards on the field, neither player can set cards, and set cards cannot be activated. So this card literally freezes your opponent's back row, and then frees you up to play the game without fear of your opponent's cards. Obviously, you still have to play around monster effects and hand traps, but in the context of the game today, this card could single-handedly win you games against certain matchups like Labyrinth, Unchained, and Rescue Ace. Now, realistically, this is only a going second side deck card, but I think it's a really interesting tech. The difficult thing is that your deck shouldn't be too dependent on its normal summon, since you'd have to normal summon Denko and then still be able to go ahead with your combo. I think that this card definitely has a lot of potential. The main deck that I'm seeing possibly using this is Bestial Horus Resonator that's been running around. You don't really need your normal summon there, and I believe that there was a list that actually was doing pretty well over in the OCG that ran 2 Denko in the main and 1 in the side. Obviously, it is dependent on the format and what deck you're playing, but I think that this card could definitely be an interesting tech to run in the foreseeable future. Now, in terms of availability, this card is pretty cheap right now, especially because it does have a common printing, and it was also an ultra rare in Dual Devastator. The printing I think you guys should consider is the secret rare, the highest possible printing for an underrated card that is only $2 at the moment. I think grabbing a playset for around $5 is more than reasonable, so if you can snag some at your locals this weekend, it isn't a bad pickup. Okay guys, that is all we have for today's episode. Some interesting tech cards popping up. I think that's one of the things I like about Yu-Gi-Oh! Over rotation games like Pokemon and Magic. You can have all of these really random old cards from the game like 20 years ago that just randomly become useful because of a specific interaction. It keeps the game really exciting, it keeps the market interesting. I personally really enjoy it. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Also make sure you leave a comment in the comments section down below. Let me know what you guys think about the cards we talked about today and what other cards are currently trending on the market. And if you haven't already, do make sure you hit that subscribe button. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.